Part 1. Don't drink the water of Wolf Creek on a full moon, Caitlin ominously warned. The bonfire popped and crackled, casting an eerie glow over her face. Heather scoffed as she took a sip of her cheap beer.
Why the hell not?
Caitlin sat back in her folding chair and crossed her legs. She too took a sip of her cheap beer, only communicating through her raised eyebrows.
Oh, come on, you never heard the Wolf Creek legend?
Brandon sneered, poking fun at his girlfriend.
I have?
Heather replied defensively.
I just wasn't paying attention.
She trailed off sheepishly. Want to indulge the new kid? Aiden asked, as he curiously looked around the bonfire with the rest of us. There were 7 of us there in total. Jack, Jonah, Brandon, Aiden, Heather, Caitlin, and I, Russell. We were having a bonfire party, celebrating yet another successful high school football season.
Legend has it,
Jonah began, creepily leaning towards the fire to aid in the spooky vibes.
if you drink the water on nights like this, a full moon, you'll be cursed to turn into a werewolf.
Jonah then jumped up in an attempt to scare us.
Ow, ow, ow!
He howled like an idiot.
Bullshit.
Jack, Caitlin's boyfriend, swore. He was already 3 beers deep, tipsy at best, drunk at worst.
It's not real.
That's why it's a legend, babe. Caitlin talked down to her boyfriend like he was a toddler. Jack blew her off, opting to take another swig of his drink instead. Aiden let out a disbelieving laugh. That's not even how you become a werewolf. Are you supposed to get bit or be born with it? I shrugged my shoulders. Wolf Creek special. Apparently the Native American tribe that lived here cursed the water in order to scare the white settlers away. Instead of wasting all that time pillaging and scalping, the tribe figured they'd get the newcomers to do the job for them. As much of a good tale that is, it's completely inaccurate, Aiden said, finishing off the liquid in his red Solo cup. He stood up from his foldable lawn chair. I'll be right back. Gotta use the loo.
The house is that way,
Caitlin yelled behind her, pointing to her house as Aiden disappeared behind the tree line a few yards away. This bathroom is closer. His loud laugh rang out from behind the trees. Caitlin rolled her eyes in annoyance.
God, if my backyard starts to smell like piss, I'll kill him.
What if he isn't peeing?
Jonah giggled. Caitlin leaned over and smacked him in the arm.
Don't even do that, Jonah.
I don't care if the story's inaccurate to the myth, I lamented, staring up at the moon. The clouds had moved, revealing the celestial being in its full, glowing beauty. I love folklore and legends. The history behind them is always so interesting.
God,
Heather drunkenly snorted.
you're such a nerd, Russell. Remind me again why you're part of the friend group?
I was about to reply with a witty retort, but the vibes of the party were thrown off by a sudden, blood-curdling scream filling the air. The sound startled us all sober. We sat there, quietly listening for it to happen again. When it did, we knew it was coming from the woods behind Caitlin's house. The woods Aiden was in.
What the hell? Is that Aiden?
Jonah asked, concerned.
Someone should go check on him,
Caitlin cried, grabbing onto Jack's arm. Wanting to seem brave and impress his girl, Jack stood up and volunteered.
I'll go.
Be careful.
Heather whined as Jack cautiously walked past the tree line.
I was totally gonna go.
Brandon started, shifting in his chair.
But he volunteered.
We all rolled our eyes. For the big guy that Brandon was, he had to be the biggest coward in the group. It didn't matter much, though. Jack was definitely the strongest out of all of us, and the best equipped to handle the situation. Jack was the team's quarterback. Brandon was the offensive lineman, John was our fullback, Aiden was the wide receiver, and I was a linebacker. Caitlin and Heather were our strongest cheerleaders. We all watched for Jack eagerly, Aiden's screams having stopped for the moment. An unsettling feeling fell over the rest of the group.
What do you think it was?
Heather asked Brandon.
I don't know. New kid's probably just dicking around with us.
Brandon responded. Caitlin pressed her lips into a thin line, not sure what to think on the matter. Jonah shifted in his seat nervously.
Those screams sounded pretty genuine to me.
I just hope he's okay, I added. Jack then re-emerged from the woods. He was slowly backing up. We all looked at him, confused, unable to see what he did. What is he doing? Caitlin asked herself. Suddenly, Jack's eyes widened. He turned and started running.
Run! He yelled, pointing to Caitlin's house. Get inside, now!
Immediately after, this massive grey wolf jumped out of the tree line, chasing Jack. It looked mean and angry.
Holy shit!
Jonah yelled, knocking his chair over as he frantically stood up, spilling his bottle of beer in the process. He lost his balance and tripped over the chair. I raced to help him up.
It's a fucking wolf!
Brendan shouted, scurrying away from the fire.
Thanks a lot, Captain Obvious,
Heather said, pushing Caitlin out of her way as she ran for safety. An offended scowl appeared on Caitlin's face.
Ow, you fucking bitch. Sorry, babe. Survival of the fittest.
She shouted behind her, managing to flick a lock of her long, dirty blonde hair behind her in the process. After getting Jonah steadied on his feet, I caught Caitlin before she fell too. John took off as we started running back to the house together. I looked back to see Jack barely managing to catch up with us. He had just veered to the left, coming up the small hill where Caitlin's fire pit sat. He went flying, the wind getting knocked out of him as the wolf caught up and pounced on him. The velocity caused him to crash right next to the fire pit, the wolf landing a few feet away from him. Jack let out a pained groan as he quickly picked himself up. Caitlin and I stopped.
Jack!
She worriedly cried out to her lover. Jack didn't have too much time to recover as the wolf shook off the landing and quickly pounced again. This time, Jack stumbled over Jonah's overturned yard chair. His unbalanced equilibrium had caused him to stumble forward, falling face first into the roaring bonfire. His screams of agony filled the night sky as his flesh was quickly singed by the hot flames. Jack flailed frantically, burning his hands on sizzling wood as he struggled to free himself out of the fire pit. To add insult to injury, the wolf pounced on him one final time. The creature snarled as it began clawing at Jack's back, effectively tearing him to shreds. Skin, muscle, and sinew flew everywhere as the aroma of burning hair and flesh reached us. A visceral cry left Caitlin's mouth as she watched Jack's movements come to a halt. His screams dimmed before stopping entirely. The only sounds left being the crackling of the fire and the wolf munching on his charred remains. Caitlin tried to run to him, but I quickly grabbed her wrist, preventing her from getting herself killed.
Leave him, I pleaded. He's gone.
Reluctantly, Caitlin followed the rest of us back to the house, wiping stray tears off her cheeks as we ran.
Hurry, get in while it's still distracted.
Jonah ushered us in through the glass back doors, one by one.
What the hell?
What do we do?
Caitlin asked, panicked.
Call the police. Duh.
Brendan said, pulling at his phone.
No, we should call animal control.
I countered.
Does it really matter? We need to call someone. Anyone.
Heather said. Heather and Jonah were standing by the door, staring in horrified awe at the wolf. Jonah squinted at the glass before quickly walking away from it.
We're safe in here, right?
We should be.
Caitlin reassured him.
Heather, get away from the windows, just in case. Why?
She scoffed.
Since when did wolves evolve opposable thumbs and can open doors?
Heather,
Jonah warned. Heather didn't falter, turning to face the rest of us as she leaned against the back doors, defiantly crossing her arms into her chest.
Relax, guys, I'll be fine.
The glass should hold, Caitlin said warily, taking a step back. Another thump on the glass rang out as the wolf charged once more. This time, the glass panes cracked against the wolf's brute force. It was hell-bent on getting in the house.
Get away from the window, Heather.
Brandon screamed. His words didn't seem to reach her. She stood there, frozen in place, staring at the glass. Glass exploded everywhere as the wolf succeeded in crashing through the doors. Heather screamed. Glass shards pierced the skin on her hands, arms, and face. A sickening crack filled the air as her skull bashed against the wall. The wolf had collided with her, the wild animal's momentum throwing her back against it. Blood poured down the side of her split-open head, her blonde hair matting and turning a crimson shade of red. Heather slumped down to the ground, leaning against the wall. Whispers and shallow cries left her mouth as she tried to look beside her, trying to get a location on the wolf.
Nice doggy,
she whispered, finding the wolf looking her dead in the eyes. The
creature licked its lips before releasing a guttural snarl. It then brutally sunk its teeth into Heather's throat, ripping it out in one giant bite. Her body writhed as a muffled cry left what was left of her throat. Heather laid there, powerless to stop her death, gurgling and choking on her own blood. Her blue eyes quickly faded to a dull shade of gray as the life drained from them. The wolf greedily lapped up the pool of blood the mangled, broken, and glass-ridden cheerleader left behind.
Call the police.
Caitlin began hitting Brandon frantically, trying to get him to move faster than he already was.
Hurry, I am.
Brandon shouted, dialing the emergency line.
It got Jack and Heather.
Caitlin sobbed. I looked at the wolf as it feasted upon Heather's remains, the light from the moon illuminating the gruesome sight for everyone to see.
Goddamn, it probably got Aiden too.
The wolf suddenly stopped what it was doing, letting out a slight whine. At the same time, the moonlight that had been shining in through the broken glass door dimmed significantly. The clouds had moved again, covering up the moon.
What the hell?
I commented as cracks and pops filled the hallway. The wolf began to jerk randomly, huffing and groaning in pain as its bones seemed to shift beneath its fur. But then, there was no fur, just gray, hairless skin. The wolf kept morphing, its skin growing pink as joints and sockets snapped and fell into place. Brandon started to gag.
I think I'm gonna be sick.
Caitlin covered her mouth with both hands, not knowing if she was keeping puke or a scream in. A sense of vertigo overcame Jonah. He propped himself up against the wall to keep himself upright. In a matter of a minute, the wolf was no more. In its place, a human man.
911, what's your emergency? Hello? Hello? Is anyone there?
An impatient voice from Brandon's phone asked, bringing some of us back to reality. Nobody was able to answer, though. We just stood there, speechless, looking at the once wolf-turned-man standing in front of us. He was naked and covered in Jack and Heather's blood.
These fucking kids, man, I swear.
The operator angrily sighed before hanging up.
The wolf didn't get me. I am the wolf.
Aiden grunted out menacingly in a gruff voice, wiping blood off the side of his mouth as he stood to his feet. Part 2.
Okay,
I said, backing up.
what the actual fuck?
Aiden chuckled.
What? Never seen a werewolf before.
Why?
Caitlin screamed, wanting to know what justification he had for killing her boyfriend and best friend.
This dumb brunette asks me why.
Aiden said ruefully, as if she should have known better. Truth be told, Brandon and I were stumped too. He scoffed, appalled at all four of us.
2 words. Fake date.
Caitlin gasped as it clicked in her mind.
Oh my god.
Aiden was referring to the time Heather had asked him out on a date, and it ended up becoming a joke. She and Brandon had been in the off phase in their on and off again relationship when Aiden first arrived to the school. She thought he was attractive and asked him out on a date, to which he said yes. Then, she and Brandon made up. Instead of canceling, Brandon and Heather had convinced the rest of us to show up to the date, where they mainly laughed at Aiden and put him down. Heather, having Caitlin hype her up, had asked him so many times why he thought she would ever date someone like him. It was a shitty and awkward situation, but by the end, we all thought he handled it fine. Better than most would. Us guys even decided he was chill enough to become part of the friend group after football tryouts. Things were pretty civil between us, besides everyone else constantly making him the butt of every joke. Aiden took it in stride, though. It seemed like he had put the fake date past him, water under the bridge and all that. Turns out we were dead wrong.
Dude, we never would have done that if we knew you were a werewolf.
Brandon argued. Aiden rolled his eyes. Do you know how long I've been waiting to get all 6 of you isolated so I could kill you? He paused, brushing a strand of his ruffled brown hair out of his face, while maniacally laughing. Imagine my surprise when I discovered this little shindig would be happening on a full moon. I've been waiting for this party the whole semester. The cloud coverage over the moon shifted slightly, its light returning for a moment, as if reacting to it. Aiden doubled over, his eyes scrunched closed as a wave of pain rippled through him. He was going to change again.
I saw a chance and took it.
Quick!
I shouted, running at him.
Hold him down! John and Brandon quickly followed my lead, the three of us tackling Aiden during a moment of vulnerability. Just as the light had come back, it went away. I held Aiden down by his back.
Caitlin, we need something to restrain him. Jonah, hold his wrists. Brandon, get his legs.
Oh, I know,
She said, a light bulb going over her head.
a light bulb going off over her head. She took off for another room in her house.
Be right back.
Even though Aiden was the smallest out of the four of us guys, Brandon, Jonah, and I struggled to keep him down. He did have the advantage of supernatural strength, after all.
You know, Russell,
Aiden strains to say through gritted teeth.
What?
I asked, indulging him.
you were the only one who never bullied or made fun of me. In my opinion, that makes it worse. Standing by, doing nothing, while I was hurt and humiliated.
I applied more pressure to the knee, pinning him down as he tried to get the upper hand on us again. Aiden chuckled angrily.
It's not.
Got it! Caitlin cheered, re-entering the hallway we were in. She held out a shiny, metallic, yet simultaneously fuzzy object. Are those? Jonah began to ask.
A pair of my parents' handcuffs? Yes.
Caitlin answered as she slipped them over Aiden's wrists. She clicked each cuff closed as tight as she could. Brandon placed his hand vertically against the side of his face and began to whisper. Her parents like to get freaky.
These won't hold me forever, you know.
They'll hold you long enough for us to find something silver.
I quipped back, applying more pressure than needed on his back. In response, Aiden tried to flip himself over. Fairly confident he was well restrained, the three of us backed off, letting him get comfortable. Caitlin stroked her thumb against her chin as she searched the files in her mind. We have to have something silver in this house. Aiden began to laugh cockily.
You really think I'd break into a house that had my kryptonite in it? I did a little reconnaissance before your little party. I came prepared.
You were in my house? When?
Instead of answering, Aiden flashed her a sleazy smile before looking over at Brandon.
I bet he doesn't know what color underwear you're wearing.
You motherfucker! I'll kick your ass!
Brandon yelled, lunging at Aiden. Jonah and I had to restrain him from doing anything too rash. We did, of course, let him get one good hit in. The four of us then moved away from the werewolf, but not too far away.
Guys, we need to figure out what to do.
Jonah said, analyzing our situation.
He's right. Those cuffs won't last forever. Neither will the cloud coverage over the moon.
I noted, observing how Aiden transformed back after the moonlight had gone away.
What can we do?
Brandon panicked.
There's no silver to defend ourselves with.
Caitlin started to have a panic attack.
This is hopeless. We're doomed.
Aiden's annoying cackles occupied the background of our conversation.
I have an idea.
I announced, after racking my brain for any possible solution. My idea was so stupid, it might just work.
I'm going to drink the water from Wolf Creek. Are you crazy?
Caitlin shouted at me.
It's just a myth. Well, so are werewolves.
I countered, looking at her appalled. Caitlin's expression wavered as she considered my logic.
Theoretically, it could work,
Jonah said, biting his thumb.
Plus, we don't have many other options at this point.
I sighed a breath of relief.
Well, that's settled then. I'll go with you,
Brandon volunteered. I shot him a concerned look. Brandon was a lot of things, but him being capable of helping pull this off was questionable.
Think about it. If we both drink from the creek and become werewolves, we'll outnumber him. We'll have the advantage.
I pressed my lips into a thin line before I reluctantly agreed. That was actually the smartest thing I'd heard him say in a while. I couldn't agree with such sound logic.
Besides, being a werewolf will be awesome.
We all scowled at Brandon.
We better get going,
he said, clearing his throat and grabbing his car keys.
We don't have all night.
I nodded in agreement. Caitlin, John, and I all stared at one another with a mutual understanding as we migrated further into the house.
Call us if anything happens,
I instructed as the two of us walked out the front door. Jonah gave a two-fingered salute from the doorway. Brandon's F-150 chirped at the end of Caitlin's driveway as he unlocked the car.
Do we know where Wolf Creek is? I asked, hopping into the shotgun seat. I've heard of it, but never been there. Yeah, it's a couple miles down the road. I took Caitlin on a picnic date near there once, Brendan answered, quickly peeling out of there. He drove down a series of streets, seemingly twisting and turning down them at random, all while speeding. Brendan would periodically look out the window at the clouds covering the moon. Any minute they could shift again, and we knew it. Are you sure you know where you're going? I asked, wriggling my hands nervously. We had been driving for almost 10 minutes at that point. I discreetly took out my phone and pulled up my Maps app, ready to search up the creek's location at a moment's notice. I stayed at the ready, but I wanted to give Brandon the benefit of the doubt first. Yes, Brandon snapped, succumbing to the pressure we were under. His foot smashed on the brakes as he began to drive slowly, scanning the scenery outside for the creek. We slowly approached a street sign for Wolf Creek Road, but Brandon wasn't paying attention to it. He was right about to drive past it. Turn here, it's Wolf Creek Road, I shouted frantically, pointing at the street sign. The truck jerked sharply as Brandon's tires screeched against the asphalt, barely managing to make the turn. Yeah, he said breathlessly. This looks familiar. See? I told you I knew where I was going. I rolled my eyes, opting to look out the window, searching for the creek. There, I said, pointing to a small sign that read Wolf Creek. It ran through a residential area. A small walking bridge had been built over the ditch the creek ran through. At the same time, we discovered the creek. Flashing blue and red lights turned on behind us. Shit, we didn't have time for this, Brendan muttered under his breath as he pulled his vehicle over. I patted his shoulder reassuringly. Hey, at least we found the creek. My heart then sank as I realized we had been drinking. Brandon and I were definitely buzzed, with a werewolf waiting back at the house, on top of us being underage. Things weren't looking so good. You kids been having fun tonight? The officer asked as Brendan rolled down his window. You were driving pretty interestingly there. Brandon and I shot each other nervous glances. I gulped. The officer leaned against the side of the truck. There was a prank call to emergency services earlier tonight coming from around this area. You boys wouldn't know anything about that, would you? That look Brandon gets when he's about to do something stupid showed up on his face. My eyes widened as I began shaking my head no, an inkling of what he was about to do crossing my mind. And 2 of my friends were killed by a werewolf, he sputtered out suddenly. A relieved laugh left his mouth as he continued to spill his guts. And the werewolf is our friend, who, it turns out, isn't really our friend. He's determined to kill our whole friend group by the end of the night. He's locked up in my girlfriend's parents' house, handcuffed, and we're trying to drink the creek water to test the legend and hopefully defeat him. I sunk my face into my hands. This wasn't going to end well. Yeah, I'm going to need you two to step out of the vehicle, please, the cop said, staring at Brandon, unamused. As if things couldn't get much worse, the full moon once again shone as the clouds covering it drifted away. The officer and his partner had lined Brandon and I up against the side of their cruiser. We had just finished doing a field sobriety test, now they were having us blow into a breathalyzer. A couple of nosy neighbors were peeking behind their curtains to see what was going on. This one older lady had come out under the false pretense of walking our pudgy bulldog. She stood on the street corner behind a stop sign, not even trying to hide the fact she was watching us. This one's under the legal limit, the officer's partner relayed, as if I wasn't standing there in front of him. The other officer sighed disappointedly as he checked Brandon's readings. So is this one. Smell any pot on him? The partner asked. The officer looked Brandon up and down before scoffing. Unfortunately not, but they gotta be on something. Let's take him back to the station and have him pee in a cup. The station? I gasped. We'd never get back in time to save Josh and Caitlin. Hell, they could have been dead already. Brandon and I shot each other a knowing glance. Officer, please, we can't go to the police station, he begged. I already explained to you. First, I'd like to check the dilation of their pupils, he said, cutting Brandon off. A bright beam of light was then shoved in his eyes, blinding him momentarily. The cop's partner nodded his head in agreement before doing the same with me. He had just finished examining me when we heard it. My heart sank to the pit in my stomach as a howl sounded out in the distance. It wasn't that far away. What the hell was that? The police officer that detained Brandon asked. He stepped back, putting his hand on his gun holster as he inspected our surroundings. The old woman's bulldog started growling and barking like crazy, sensing a predator lurking nearby. Quick, while they're distracted, Brandon suddenly yelled, blindly taking off.
To the creek!
I stood there, still dazed by the flashlight, rapidly blinking to bring my vision back.
Hey!
The officer yelled. He was about to chase after him, but paused, curiously. Still blinded by the light, Brandon haphazardly ran toward where he thought he heard the rushing water of the creek. He actually ran in the opposite direction towards the old lady and her dog. The animal, rightfully scared, had begun pissing itself out of fear. Brandon stepped in the puddle that had pooled on the sidewalk. Thinking it was the creek, he leaned down and gathered a small sample in his hands, sloppily lapping it up.
Heads up, Russell. The creek water tastes gross. It's not refreshing at all.
He commented through sips of the yellow liquid, still oblivious to what he was actually drinking. Are you sure this man isn't on any drugs, officer? The old woman asked, clutching her pearls. Even the dog looked at him like, dude, what the fuck is this guy doing? The three of us just stared at him, cringing, too stunned to say anything. Brandon then blinked rapidly, his temporary blindness dissipating.
Oh, ew!
He exclaimed, realizing his mistake. He wiped the piss off of his hands, spitting and gagging all the way over to Wolf Creek, on the verge of vomiting. He was just about to cleanse the delightful taste of dog piss out of his mouth when one of the officers shouted, causing him to pause. A gigantic, gray blur had collided with the first officer, dragging him away from his police cruiser.
He's here!
I yelled, diving out of the way.
Jesus Christ!
The partner exclaimed, reaching for his gun. He barely managed to pull the weapon out of the holster before Aiden attacked him too. A deadly snarl left the wolf's maw as he feasted on the dead officer's entrails. When he was finished, Aiden's eyes landed right on me. I slowly began to crawl backwards. The wolf predatorily stalked toward me. I could see the bloodlust swirling in Aiden's glowing blue eyes. I looked behind me at the innocent woman and dog. I took my eyes off of the wolf to warn them.
Go! Get out of here, before it's too late!
The woman shook like crazy, but nodded her head in understanding, wrangling her dog up to escape. I then turned back, bracing for impact, as Aiden readied to go in for the kill. He jumped, but landed behind me. Confused and relieved, I looked to see why. The pudgy bulldog had broken free of its leash, yapping as it charged forward in an attempt to protect its owner instead of running away. Deeming the dog as more of a threat than me, Aiden changed course last second to neutralize it.
Frederick, no!
The old lady cried as she reached out for her dog. But it was too late. Though Frederick, the pudgy bulldog, got a good nip or two in there, he was no match for his gigantic werewolf opponent. The old lady, seemingly unaware of what had attacked her dog, whipped the metal part of the dog leash at Aiden.
Bad dog! Bad!
Annoyed, Aiden quickly pounced on the old woman, her shrill screams filling the air as she was torn apart. I quickly stood up, realizing this was the only chance we'd get. Brandon and I met up at the side of the creek. We took one last glance at the moon, which would once again be covered soon, before finally drinking the water of Wolf Creek. Aiden disapprovingly howled. He didn't get a chance to do anything as he started shifting back into a human again.
God, I hope I didn't get a brain-eating amoeba from this,
I said, gulping down a giant mouthful of gritty creek water.
Tastes better than dog piss,
Brandon said, using the water to flush his tongue. Aiden let out a pained groan as his vocal cords snapped back into place. We stopped drinking from the creek to look at him.
We need to get him back to the house while the moon is still covered.
Brandon looked over to the police cruiser, which still had the red and blue lights on.
I got it.
He took off, running over to the police officers' corpses. Another sinister laugh left Aiden's mouth, his whole body human again.
You think you can stop me?
No, not really, I said, wiping my mouth off. Brandon's figure appeared in my peripheral vision. But you should really put some pants on. Just then, Brandon charged forward, having stolen a taser from the cops. He released a guttural cry as he pressed the trigger, going right for Aiden's exposed testicles. With impeccable aim, two electrified prongs satisfyingly connected to the man's unclothed private parts. Aiden fell to the floor, convulsing as he tried to yank the metal out of him. He screamed through gritted teeth as 50,000 volts of electricity ravaged his body. A shudder crept down my spine as I imagined the pain he was feeling. Then I remembered he killed my friends and shrugged it off.
Come on, let's get him in the bed of the truck,
Brandon said, picking up Aiden's unconscious body. I got his arms and we chucked him into the car. Brandon and I quickly peeled out of there before more cops came to investigate the scene. "Where have you guys been?" Caitlin scalded as we pulled into the driveway. A streak of blood ran down her face. Jonah stood beside Caitlin, comforting her. He looked pretty banged up, too, with a few cuts and bruises on his arm. "He got out." "Yeah, we know," I said, exiting the truck. "We've been busy," Braden quipped, as he and I pulled Aiden's unconscious body out of the bed of his truck. Jonah ran over to help carry him back into the house. We settled him on the couch in the living room. "Got any more handcuffs?" Jonah asked Caitlin with a smirk. He put his hands on his hips, looking down at Aiden. "Unfortunately not," she answered. Caitlin then looked around, her eyes landing on the coat rack next to the front door. "This scarf might work, though." Jonah took the scarf and started tying Aiden's hands together. I found a small throw blanket and used it to tie his legs together. "This should hold, for a little while at least." Brandon placed a couch pillow over Aiden's nether regions. "You think it worked?" he asked. "I don't feel any different." My shoulders shrugged as I took a seat on the love seat. The moon was covered when we drank the water, and was still covered then. Only time would tell if we reacted the same to the moonlight as Aiden. "I did a little digging while you were gone," Caitlin started, "about Wolf Creek and the legend." "What did you find?" I asked, curiously. She took a deep breath before info-dumping on us. "So, turns out the Native Americans cursed the creek not only to try to drive the settlers away, but to restore balance. You see, the settlers were disrupting the ecosystem by overhunting the wolf population for sport. Their solution? Kill another wolf and drag its bleeding-out corpse into the middle of the creek, one of the settlement's main access to water, let me remind you, on the night of a full moon. The tribe's medicine man performed a ritual in secret, dancing and drumming all night long until the creek turned red. Then voila, we got our werewolf-cursed creek." Us guys looked at one another, processing all that. "There's a lot to unpack there," Jonah said. Caitlin paused, her eyebrows furrowing in concern. "There's something else." She didn't get to finish her thought as she was interrupted by Aiden returning to consciousness. He came to in another maniacal laughing fit.
Your time is running out,
He sang.
You can't become a werewolf by drinking cursed creek water. That's not how it works. You're either born into it, like me, or you get bitten and turned.
"You don't know that," I scoffed, coming to a realization. The look on Aiden's face told me everything I needed to know. "That's why you didn't kill Caitlin or Jonah after you escaped and came right for Brandon and I." Jonah came to a similar understanding. "He was trying to stop you from drinking the water, because if the curse is real, then he's fucked."
No.
He lied, squirming in his binds. We'd backed him into a corner, which Aiden didn't like.
You know what? It doesn't matter, because your little plan won't work.
Brandon smirked as he pointed out of Caitlin's living room windows. "Looks like we're about to find out." The full moon once again graced us with her presence as her cloudy prison set her free. The moonlight slowly crept through the living room, first landing on Brandon, then me, and finally Aiden. Brandon stood there, anxiously waiting for something to happen. "Hey guys, I don't think..." Suddenly, he doubled over, with Aiden following. "What the fuck?" Brandon swore. His whole body was shaking, and he was drenched in sweat. The muscles underneath his skin rippled, shifting and reforming themselves. I watched as both Aiden and Brandon's forms began to change. Confusion set in as I wondered why nothing had happened to me. I suddenly yelped as a bolt of electricity exploded from the top of my skull all the way down to my big toe. There it was, the start of my transformation. The curse of Wolf Creek. It wasn't just a legend. It was real. Brandon cried as the skin on his forearm tore apart. Instead of blood, matted gray fur poured out of the open wound. Fangs sprouted in his mouth as his nails sharpened into claws. As I began to feel what he was, a loud scream left him as he clutched his sides. "This doesn't feel right." "No shit," Jonah yelled. "You're turning into a werewolf. There's nothing natural about that." "My insides, they feel like they're on fire." "That's what I was trying to tell you earlier," Caitlin cut in. "The curse only works on those who are pure of heart." "What the hell does that even mean?" Brandon groaned, clutching his sides even harder. He coughed, spitting up black blood into a semi-wolf-turned hand. He shuddered at the sight of it. "Oh no," she whimpered after seeing the blood. "Kate, Caitlin, what does that mean? I yelled as another surge of electricity shocked me. Only the pure of heart people were cursed, she stammered out. Because then they would create the most damage and destruction to their loved ones. The medicine doctors knew there would be those who drank from the creek, seeking out the power of the curse. So, the men who drank out of the creek seeking to become the beast would die during their transformation. Spitting up black blood means you weren't pure of heart. Brandon then began uncontrollably seizing, black blood oozing out of every orifice. His body elongated as his body still attempted to transition. Caitlin cried as she screamed, running into Jonah's arms for comfort. If I'm gonna die, it's delete my search history, Brandon said with his last gasping breath. His mangled half-wolf body slowly writhed until the movements stopped. He died a quick yet torturous death. At least it was fast. Is that gonna happen to me? I freaked as a tremendous wave of pain knocked me to my knees. A fire was burning beneath my skin as my muscles and bones took on a mind of their own. Brandon's transformation had started before mine, but I wasn't too far behind. I was seeking to become a werewolf too. Aiden, who had ripped himself out of his cloth binds, was mainly focused at shifting back into his wolf form, but he began to laugh again.
You idiots,
he grunted, his eyes glowing blue.
You're practically killing yourselves for me.
My vision blurred and I slumped forward, the palm of my half-turned hand catching the floor and holding me steady, accepting my fate. I just decided to let go. Everything went dark for a moment. The night's events then flashed in my mind. I helped pull Jonah up after tripping on his yard chair. Did the same with Caitlin, and I prevented her from going back to Jack's corpse earlier. Then risked turning my back on Aiden to warn the old woman. Then everything exploded into a blinding light. In a daze, I heard someone go, "Hey, he's not oozing black goo." That might be true, but that does not look like Aiden does, the other voice replied frantically. The voices of my friends pulled me back for a minute. I opened my eyes and I was different. Taller, bulkier, powerful. The creek's curse must have differed from that of Aiden's, whereas he became a literal wolf. I had transformed into a big ball of muscles, fangs, and fur. A real-life wolfman. I was still me on the inside, able to recognize Caitlin when she said, "Oh, he actually looks kind of cute." And Jonah, when he made a face at her. She shrugged, the both of them able to tell I was still me. Yeah, you're right. I spun my massive frame around after a piercing growl shook the house. Anger filled my newly mended bones as Aiden, now a wolf, stood at the end of the connected dining room. He had a similar disdained expression on his muzzle. It was then, when I towered over him, that I realized there never needed to be two of us to take him on. I was stronger than Aiden all on my own. Red filled my vision. I wanted to kill him. I was going to kill him. Aiden huffed one final time before jumping at me. I body slammed him midair, sending him flying into Caitlin's kitchen table. I didn't give him a chance to shake it off, slashing at his abdomen with my large clawed paw. He let out an agonized whine as his breaths got heavier. Poor Caitlin screamed at the carnage. My claws had cut deep, nearly an inch away from disemboweling him. Aiden struggled to stand. The wound was too big and too deep, though to my dismay, it had already begun to heal. I'd have to resort to more drastic measures. "Oh, goddamn," Jonah muttered as I picked Aiden up by his neck with one hand. He whined and clawed at my hand and wrist, trying to break himself free. His choked grasps rang out as I pierced his soul with my deathly glare. My lips curled upward into a smile as I savored the sound of Aiden's windpipe fracturing after a light squeeze. The smaller wolf squirmed and shook as he began to wheeze, unable to breathe. I decided I'd put the poor pup out of its misery, showing him the mercy he hadn't granted me or my friends. With an earth-shattering roar, my free hand sliced against the skin and fur of Aiden's neck. His decapitated head fell to the floor with a satisfying thud. I chucked the body down next to it, like the filth he was. It was done. Aiden was dead. But, with the night I'd had, his death just seemed so anticlimactic. I needed to do more. I needed to keep killing. My supernatural hearing turned into the slight shuffling coming from behind me. I turned to face Caitlin and Jonah. "You did it!" Caitlin cheered. "You killed him!" My head turned slightly to the side as I looked at her.
The image of Caitlin's sweet, silky blood pouring between my fingers filled my mind's eye. Red started to seep into the corners of my vision. I took a step forward. "Russell?" Jonah questioned, doing the opposite of me and taking a cautionary step back.
You okay, bud?
This was wrong. What was I thinking of doing? These people are my friends. I tried to shake the killer thoughts out of my head. I tried to hold on to myself. I huffed, smacking myself. I looked at Caitlin and Jonah once more, hoping they would anchor me back to reality. They looked frightened, scared. I wanted to confront them, but at the same time, the red had taken up most of my vision. A large part of me enjoyed that look on their faces. The smell of fear that wafted off them was almost addictive. The harder I fought to keep myself in control, the more I felt small pieces of me falling away, replaced by something feral and bloodthirsty.
Shit, Caitlin,
Jonah muttered, motioning for her to get closer to him.
he's losing it.
Caitlin slowly walked back to Jonah.
What do we do?
Jonah accidentally bumped into the bookshelf against the side wall of the living room in his attempts to get away from me. He lost his balance and stumbled to the floor. Caitlin yelped. At the same time, red had completely filled my vision as I got pushed into the passenger seat. Caitlin's dad's radio turned on. "What's Up" by 4 non-blondes blasted at full volume. A sudden noise startled and pushed me forward. I lunged after Caitlin. She managed to dodge out of the way as I body slammed into the bookshelf. The furniture was crushed by my body weight. Splintered wood, books, and glass figurines flew everywhere. It didn't take me long to pick myself up. A snarl left my mouth as I faced her once more. She quivered in a corner, fear rendering her legs useless. I opened my gaping maw, ready to take a bite out of Caitlin. My jaw snapped as I went in for the kill. Unfortunately, Jonah had threw himself in front of my target. My fangs sunk deep into his forearm instead of Caitlin's neck. Oh well, he'd have to do.
Go!
He screamed out in pain, thick rivulets of his blood dripping to the ground. Caitlin, jostled out of her frozen state of shock, did as told and took off. Another yell left his mouth as I bit down harder, cracking his bones. Jonah used his free hand to begin poking at my eye. I shook him off, accidentally releasing his arm. Angrily, I slashed at his face, my claws slicing the skin around his eye open. The sweet sound of his agonizing cries filled my eardrums. Still dazed from my attack, I grabbed him by the neck and lifted him in the air like I'd done with Aiden. Caitlin yelled as she charged at me from behind. While I was distracted with Jonah, she had grabbed a sharp wooden piece of her broken dining room table. Without enough time to react, the makeshift spear was thrust into my lower back. Caitlin continued to scream her primal yells as she impaled the piece of wood deeper inside me. Jonah got flung across the house in the chaos. My pained roar jostled the atoms in the air as the splintered piece of wood emerged out of the other side. Caitlin let out a relieved breath as my hands began to shake and my balance faltered for a second. In my opinion, she let it out a little too early. I grabbed the bloody piece of wood and thrust it back. A wet squelch came from behind me. The force of my thrust had pushed the other end of the makeshift spear into Caitlin's abdomen. I turned around to see the cheerleader stunned, staring at the piece of wood that protruded out of her stomach. Shaky yelp left her mouth as I licked my lips. My wound was already almost done healing. I simply returned the favor, grabbing the slick end of the thing. I used my strength to guide it through Caitlin's intestines and vital organs until it came out her backside. She groaned in pain, looking at me wide-eyed. Delectable fear swelled within them. With a sadistic chuff, I twisted the wood. She let out another guttural scream. An even worse one than before followed as I yanked the piece of wood out entirely. A gaping hole was left in the girl's side, her intestines slowly beginning to slide out of it. To prevent that from happening, I punched my fist into the hole, lifting her up into the air and turning her sideways. The song played in the background, delightfully crescendoed.
No, Russell, please.
Caitlin begged through gasping breaths as I put my other anthropomorphic paw on her hip and began to teasingly tug. Her pleas went unanswered as I tightened my grasp around her and really began pulling. The sound of her flesh stretching and tearing drowned out her death screeches. Like cracking open an egg, Caitlin's organs began falling out of her lower body as I tore her in half. Her cries diminished not even a second after that. Her eyes faded to gray as one final tug broke her spine apart. I howled triumphantly, tossing the split girl's remains away. I'd eat them later, but first I had to finish the hunt and kill Jonah. Setting out to do just that, my foot lurched forward. Then it halted, and my body began to violently convulse. A great fiery pain spread through my veins like a wildfire. I searched frantically for the cause, my eyes landing just outside the living room window. In all the excitement, I hadn't realized that dawn had arrived, the sunrise not far behind it. The full moon had sunken behind the horizon, not to rise again for another month. The night was over. Just as quickly as I transformed and lost myself, my body began to change back to normal. The stress of the night and the pain was so overwhelming that I blacked out. It didn't help that I crashed face first into the floor either. The last trills of the song faded away as I sunk deeper and deeper into unconsciousness.
Hey, this one's breathing!
Someone shouted loudly next to my ear, waking me up.
Sole survivor is a young man. His clothes have been torn to shreds and he's drenched in blood.
The next thing I knew, a blinding light was being shone in my eyes.
Hello? Sir, can you hear me? What happened here?
I rubbed the stinging out of my eyes. My vision was blurry, and the events of last night were hazy. "Ooh, Wolf," I stuttered out. Who I now realized was a paramedic, reported that back to his superior.
Just like we thought, another animal attack. First Wolf Creek Road, and now this.
Caitlin? Jonah? I groggily mumbled, sitting up with the aid of the paramedic. I turned my head to see the damage, but she covered my eyes and had me look at her.
You don't want to see that,
she solemnly said.
Your friends didn't make it.
What happened to them? I asked, becoming more lucid. The paramedic paused, debating if she should divulge that information to me. After a moment of contemplating, she decided to let me know.
Carnage. That's what happened to them. Worst of all, we think the wolf may have dragged one of the bodies back out into the woods with it. There's a chance they're still alive, but it's slim. We have a team combing that area right now as we speak.
I threw up, not from the paramedic's words, but from the memories of attacking Jonah and Caitlin, then tearing Aiden to pieces rushing in. I remember drinking the water from Wolf Creek, then turning into a werewolf. If one of us was unaccounted for, then that must mean Jonah was the one she was talking about. I remember slashing at his eye, but not killing him. I was brought out of my thoughts as two more paramedics joined us with a stretcher. They put a C-collar around my neck and loaded me in. It was useless. I was completely healed, and most of the blood on my clothes weren't even mine. For a sense of normalcy and to quell any suspicion, I let them take me. As they started rolling me out of an ambulance, a slip of paper fell out of my tattered pocket.
"Oops, you dropped this,"
the male paramedic said, handing me the slip of paper.
"Here you go."
I grabbed it, curiously. To my knowledge, there hadn't been anything in that pocket to begin with. When I unfolded it, I found a note scribbled haphazardly and in a rush. That note read, "I'm still alive." My eyes widened in shock. The paramedics had to hold me down by my chest as I began thrashing around. A panic attack enveloped me, and I felt like I was suffocating. I'd bitten him. Jonah. Aiden had said something earlier in the night about being born cursed or it transferring through a bite. Did the Wolf Creek curse work the same as his? My sense of dread worsened as I was loaded into the back of an ambulance. I swore someone was watching me from just beyond the tree line, from Caitlin's backyard. It really hit home that last night was real when the coroner started rolling the blood-stained sheet-covered corpses of my friends out of the house. That was the last thing I saw before the doors slammed shut and the ambulance began its journey to the hospital. So, I implore you, don't drink the water of Wolf Creek on the night of a full moon. Otherwise, you'll end up just like me.
Thank you for listening and delving with me into the dark together.
Please remember to leave a thumbs up and subscribe if you feel so inclined. The more engagement this video gets, the more YouTube will push my content to othus.
Thus, the following will grow.
All stories read in this channel will be available on Spotify, iTunes, and just about everywhere else. Links in the description.
Thank you for listening and feeding the cause. We'll be seeing you